In the last episode, we talked about what it's like to transition from being an individual contributor into a leader and explored some trade-offs. If you missed the episode, be sure to check it out in the link below this video. In today's episode, we're going to talk about one of the major concerns people have that holds them back from doing the transition, which is the concern that their skills are going to get rusty. So stay tuned. Welcome to Build, brought to you by Pivotal Tracker. I'm your host, Purnima Vijay Shankar. In each episode, innovators and I debunk a number of myths and misconceptions related to building products, companies, and your career in tech. One myth that often holds us back from transitioning from being that individual contributor into a leader is the fear that we're going to get rusty when it comes to the skills that we've worked painstakingly hard to craft. So if you're an engineer, you're going to lose the ability to code. If you're a designer, you lose the ability to design. And if you're a salesperson or a marketer, you lose your ability to close. Well, in today's episode, we're going to debunk that myth and more. And to help us out, Hsu is back, who is an engineering leadership coach, and she's going to help us dive into this myth. So thanks again for joining us, Jean.
Thanks for having me again.
Yeah. So last time we talked about, the benefits of going from being an individual contributor to a leader, especially in engineering, and, not to shy away from it if we feel worried that, we're not capable of doing it. Mm-hmm. But I know another concern that people have is not about their capabilities of doing the future work or being a leader, but, oh my gosh, I'm no longer going to be capable of doing my current job, whether that's coding, designing, marketing, or so on. Right. So why do you think people have this fear?
I think it's something we touched on last time, which is like they don't see the path of the leadership role, right? And so it's of course you're going to kind of hold on to what you know, which is the technical skills, the coding, all that stuff. And so a lot of the times when I have this conversation with people, what I say is like, as a coach, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of illuminate that other path, the leadership path. And for most of the people I'm talking to, it's not as much of a technical leadership path. It's more of a people management path, which are both, leadership paths. But like part of my role is to illuminate that so that they then the question is kind of like implies that you don't want those technical skills to get rusty. Right. Which I often feel like it's a symptom of like they're not getting enough investment and seeing the rewards of stepping into a leadership role and having more broader impact.
Yeah, or learning new skills.
Right, or learning new skills.
Yeah. So is this a legitimate fear, though? Like, do our skills become rusty as we go into a new leadership position or any new role?
I mean, for my technical skills, yeah, for sure they're rusty. Yeah, they're definitely rusty because I'm not practicing them, right? And I think you do have to get to a point where you feel comfortable with that, and you're not like. And I definitely was at a point when I wasn't comfortable with that, and I, when I was sort of in transition, and I remember one morning I woke up and my calendar was back to back, like 9 to 5:30, filled with meetings, and I like pulled out my laptop and I opened up like 3 pull requests to just delete like code that I had found that was unused. I just did this 15 minutes. Yeah. I was like, okay, good. I've done something today.
Well, sometimes throwing out trash is helpful.
Yeah. And when I told my manager this, he was like, is that the best use of your time? Right. He asked me this and was like, yeah, okay, clearly you know the answer to that. That's a rhetorical question. It's not the best use of my time. And it's actually indicative of like something else, which is that I haven't really transitioned my mindset to like the actual work that I'm doing in this new role is work, you know, and seeing the impact of it, that wasn't clear to me yet. And so that's why I was sort of like holding on to this sort of, thing that made me feel good in my past role.
Yeah. And how can you figure out what the new work is? Because I think that's a big problem for people is they're thrust into this role or it's a nice promotion. Or maybe they genuinely want it. But then in that first week, month, even year, they're not really sure what to do on like a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. I mean, I think and adding to that is that a lot of companies have, founders or managers who also haven't done it before. Right?
Right.
And so they're not getting that model of like, oh, this is what, this is who I want to be as a manager. And like, as an engineer, you see all sorts of like, oh, this person went to like Android or front end, or they're more of a tech lead. And this person's more of a, like 10X engineer type. And you don't really get to see that as much with if you're talking purely about like the people side of leadership, the people management. So, I mean, one of the ways that you can do that is, I mean, this is a little bit self-promotional, but working with a coach like me, who can kind of help you see that path, or, help the people on your team see that path. There's books, there's definitely resources. There's a lot of Slack teams that I think just being in the Slack teams is like lurking. You kind of absorb the sort of like, what are the topics people talk about, and what are the things that come up? Like, because when you're not managing people, you don't see the things like, performance reviews, performance improvement plans, like how to reward people, how to give them positive feedback and incentivize them and motivate them. You don't see that like as closely.
Yeah, I think you're onto something. The concept of shadowing, actually, it can be really valuable.
Right.
And I think for me personally, I got to do a lot of that, having been at a very early stage startup and not as the founder, but rather as the founding engineer. So seeing how kind of marketing and sales and engineering and product all operated, and the leaders in those was valuable, because when you're in the ground floor, you see how people develop, but not everybody has access to that, and not every manager enjoys being shadowed. So, what are some other ways you could simulate that kind of behavior?
I think if you have a close peer group at your company, that can be a good place to start to have these conversations, like some place that's trusted and confidential. So if if you're a tech lead or you're a first-time people manager, to have someone that you could say, hey, I have this situation, like, and you don't have to be alone in figuring out, a strategy to deal with it, but you can go to your peer and kind of have this kind of peer mentoring or coaching relationship. So I found that that's useful, and just in like seeing what other people are doing and their perspectives.
Yeah. And what about setting expectations? I think some the manager of managers are good at setting expectations, and some are more carefree and want you to kind of discover yourself. What have you seen in your experience?
What do you mean by expectations?
So the expectation of, hey, if you're the hiring manager, for example, you're going to hire 30 direct reports. Or if you are the team manager, you're going to like push this product, or whatever the goals are of the organization. Yeah. Some people are better at kind of delineating and having a clear set of expectations along with like standards, and others are like, well, here's kind of the company motto, like do no evil and ship. Right. So you're like, within the confines of that, what do I do on a day-to-day?
Yeah, I think having some like quarterly or monthly sort of alignment and expectation setting is useful. And it's the same as like, the first time you become a manager or a tech lead, it feels really awkward to like not have, most people start off with like no stand-ups. And so then they're just like, well, I don't know what this person's working on. I haven't heard from them in 3 days. It's like, oh, maybe you should have stand-ups. Yeah. Or maybe you should have some sort of weekly or bi-weekly, twice a week meeting where, people say if they're on track or not. And I think that's sort of generally a good strategy, is to set the high level expectations and then kind of report back on those. Like, am I on track to hit those goals?
Yeah.
Because then it feels like it's set up beforehand. So it's not like, hey, I noticed things aren't going well, so that's why I'm checking in on you.
Yeah, then it feels like, am I getting reprimanded or am I getting guided? So coming back to this concept again of the skills, and as somebody who's either, technical or has a craft, and moving away from that into this more amorphous kind of squishy leadership role, are there actual skills that you acquire as a leader?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean,
yeah, what are those?
One of the ways that I was told to think about it, because for me, I was sort of like, I don't understand. Like, I had these technical skills, and now I'm being asked to do this thing where I feel like it's a completely different skill set, right? Like, I'm talking to people one-on-one all day, and like dealing with the things that are coming up there. And so the way I was like kind of told or like asked to think about it was that it's still problem solving. It's just that the interfaces and the APIs are people and teams rather than, code and services and systems. So the system, there's still systems, but it's like people and teams, and you have to think about, how do these teams, what's the API between them, and it's more like that. And
yeah.
Yeah.
What are some skills that you can point to now on your resume or LinkedIn?
I mean, how to give difficult feedback.
That's important.
How to, debug teams that are not working efficiently. So there's sort of the low level like tweaks, like, email me once a day, like the kind of low level things, but then like taking a team that's not working very effectively and making like a bunch of like high level changes and staffing and and then have them actually be able to execute because of the changes you made. Like that's something you don't get to see. That's sort of like, rather than the little refactors, you're kind of doing a more of like a full rewrite or something.
Yeah, a reorg, right?
Reorg.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything else?
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton. I mean, as many technical skills there are as many in leadership and people management.
Yeah, I think it's important for people to understand that. What about writing? Do you feel like that's a valuable skill?
Yeah, I mean, Medium was very much a writing culture.
Right.
Everything was like written internally, and the internal version of Medium. And I feel like that's something that, I consider myself also still in a leadership role, even though I just work for myself, but I work with a lot of people, and I feel like all the time I spend in writing has, come back, and it's like a huge investment for me. I mean, it pays off.
Yeah. So in being a leader, investing in writing is good, whether or not you're actually comfortable doing it or feel like you're particularly good at it.
Yeah, I think it's something that's really valuable to get better at. And even if it's like, even if you're not publishing or like whether it's writing emails, like, I'm sure you've all had this experience where you get this like massive email and you just don't even read it, right? And then whoever's sent it is like, but I sent you all the information, right? And so it's sort of this like brain dump, like over communication strategy. So I think writing is just a part of communication and figuring out what's the right level of communication, because you can under communicate. I think most people in kind of engineering teams tend to under communicate, and then there's this tendency to over communicate to try to correct for it, and then people just kind of like tune you out. So figuring out like what's the right, what do people want to hear? What do they care about? That's all part of the writing too.
Nice. Now, what prompted you to transition to being an engineering leadership coach?
So in kind of reflecting in my time at Medium, I realized that I had a lot of peer support. I had a lot of peer support and my manager's support in making that transition. And even then, it was hard. And so I started talking to people at different companies and realizing that that transition, like most people don't have any support. They're getting, they kind of have their direct reports and they have to keep it together so that they seem like, things aren't falling apart. And a lot of times they have like sort of the absent whoever, CEO or CTO who's not really helping them, and they don't have that peer. And so I really wanted to like, I saw how the benefits of having, a really like people-centric and caring engineering manager, because that's really the type of team we built at Medium, and thinking about how to kind of expand my own impact. I was like, oh, what if I worked with a bunch of different companies and tried to help them kind of level up their engineering management game. So that's kind of how I landed on that. And I also really enjoyed the one-on-one work that I was doing at Medium.
Nice.
Teaching. Yeah.
So that's what you're doing now. You are a leadership coach for engineering teams.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And what's kind of your sweet spot in terms of a team size?
I'd say it depends.
Yeah.
So like I work with some companies that are like 6 people. Yeah. I work with some companies that are like 3,000 people, but the teams themselves are smaller.
Yeah.
I really enjoy the sort of 10 to 50 people engineering teams, because I feel like there's still a lot of malleability in what they're doing and how they're building out their management structure. And I like to work with first-time managers because I feel like there's no like bad habits to break. Like you can just be the one who's like, this is what management is, and they're like, okay.
Yeah.
Yes, that's sort of where I initially started when I created my business. But now I'm working with anyone from like trying to figure out whether they want to go in the people management direction or stay in the technical side of things, or all the way through like directors and VP Eng.
That's awesome. And what are some questions or problems that you help them with?
A lot of it is honestly like the mindset. So a lot of it is sort of, as people move into leadership roles, or they don't have leadership roles, but they kind of like are expected to step up so that they can get the explicit role. A lot of it is sort of seeing that they don't really need the permission, or they don't need someone to be like, I bestow on you this role. Now you may do these things. Right. And so just getting people to see that, like, and as a coach, I'll push them like, hey, what do you need to try? Like, what are some things you can try out like this week or next week? And then they report back and I'm like, okay, cool. And so it's just like really cool when you have a whole team of people just all experimenting with their behavior, and you just see like everyone kind of stepping up a bit more and taking initiative.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jean. For our audience out there who may want to get in touch with you because they have an engineering team or an organization that could use some of your coaching, how can they do that?
They can go to my website at jeanhsu.com, and I also have a link to my writing there too as well.
Great. Well, we'll be sure to include the link below this video.
Okay, thank you.
That's it for this week's episode. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to receive more episodes like today's and short build tips. Ciao for now. This episode of Build is brought to you by our sponsor, Pivotal Tracker.